Hi, welcome back to the Growing Leaders podcast. This is kind of a significant welcome back because we haven't recorded a podcast in a while. When was the last time?
Almost a year.
Okay, so almost a year.
November of last year was our last episode.
So welcome back to all of you. Welcome back to us. But then also, Christine, welcome back to you, to the country. You just, you were given freedom to roam freely about the cabin of the globe.
Yes.
Where were you?
I was in Incheon, South Korea, right outside of Seoul.
Sorry, bless you. Say it again.
Incheon?
How do you spell it?
No.
Okay. And that is really a coast city, kind of on the southwest side of South Korea, and
It's right outside of Seoul.
right outside of Seoul. And what were you doing there?
I was a delegate for the Lebanon Congress.
Okay. And again, bless you. And what is the Lebanon Conference?
The Lebanon Congress was founded in, I want to say 1974, if I remember correctly.
Really?
From Billy Graham and John Stott. And then there have been 4 congresses since then, the last one being in Cape Town in 2010. And so this was a gathering of 5,000 leaders from around the world there in South Korea, essentially meeting around the fulfillment of the Great Commission, looking for different synergies or strategies, but the strategic meeting of leaders.
Yeah, so this was like 5,000 leaders from across the world. That it really is a who's who of Christian ministries and churches. It's included people like Bill Bright in the past, Tim Keller, a lot of guys like that. But the focus has been very, very much on how do you reach people for Jesus across the whole world? How do we do that? How do we do that better? So cool that it exists. And then you were there for how long?
All in all, with travel time is about 12 days.
12 days. And then as far as like the actual conference itself, how long did it last?
8 days.
8 days. And so I imagine a lot of it was coming together in bigger meetings and then breakouts into smaller sessions about the way it went.
Yeah, so there were there were big meetings in the morning, and then you were at tables and there were table discussions after the big meetings and worship. And then there was a break for lunch, and some different people would break off for meetings then, or eat in the cafeteria, where then they had you seated in rows, like family style. So then you were always seated next to someone different. And then in the afternoons, there were like workshops, where different groups, big and small, could lead a workshop. And then I was like from 1 to 3, and then 3 on, you were in these collaborative work groups.
That's great. First of all, I think it's great for everybody to even know that that exists, that kind of thing exists. A lot of times we kind of just feel like we're in our own little silos, or we can even feel like it feels like the things of God aren't as powerfully being expressed out in our culture or society, which of course is wrong. It's just we don't have a lens to see it correctly. But then something like this happens and you are surrounded by a huge amount of people, and it's not perfect. It's never perfect. The moment any of us shows up, we guaranteed that it's not perfect, but it is, it was really something. What would you say was the main reason you were there, and what would you say was your main takeaway?
I think the main reason I was there was to learn. I think we even met just before I left, that like it almost feels like going to this is like slightly like we're almost like 2 years away from being ready to really engage. So it was a lot of learning, both from what Lasan is doing, but then other groups who are there. And then I was looking to meet people, like our future leaders, board members, people for this podcast. I have a list. And then main takeaways, I think there are a lot of people who are hungry for new ways, for his ways. And so, and how do we then turn together to find him together? And would there be collaborative synergies for ministry in the future?
We were hanging out with your husband, Pete, at one point, and we went out to breakfast after a men's prayer time. And he said, well, Christine's over there in Korea. She's meeting a lot of great single guys. We're like, Pete, what are you talking about? And what we realized is you were just meeting amazing people that you wish for some of the single girls you know.
Yes, I was like, I know someone I want you to meet.
Yeah, we're like, Pete, you've got to clean up the way you present this. Well, I'm glad you went. Obviously, with Boy with a Ball, our focus is really on changing the world by helping young people learn to change the world. Like that's the kind of crazy part of it is our big bet is that you're going to change the world most easily, most dramatically by investing in young people. They just don't have as many bad habits, not as many, or they're not as profound. They have as many, but they're not as deep. And so you were over there kind of representing that, connecting with groups. There's lots of exciting news that will come out in the next weeks or months, but it's really it's really exciting stuff. I think everyone should know that Jesus is on the throne and that he's still on the throne and he's doing amazing things. And the earth is already filled with the glory of God, but it's being filled with the knowledge of the glory of God. And that's exciting. Today, we are talking about something really near and dear to our hearts, which is youth in crisis, the situation in Lebanon. And the situation in Lebanon represents a lot of areas of conflict, like right now in Ethiopia, in the Gambela region and different regions, there's crisis next door in the countries next door, including South Sudan. And so when there's crisis, when there's conflict, what that does is it makes it a better bet as a family to move your family and to race out of all the protective factors of being in your own town or village or family to just get out. It's that kind of thing that would make you do that. Think about you as a family getting ready, doing your shopping list on a Saturday, deciding how you're going to spend your weekend. You for sure need to mow the yard. And then what would it take to make you think that the best thing for my family is to get out of here as quickly as possible? What's particularly impactful is that many of these families, when things happen like this, and there's a great movie you can see on Netflix, The Swimmers, which is about two sisters who are in Syria. And they make a very poignant where one of the girls is swimming in a kind of a swim meet. And all of a sudden, a bomb comes down through the roof and is in the water with the girls.
That's a true story.
It's a true story. That's the kind of thing that would mobilize you. But what makes it particularly poignant is that they don't end up then in the same kind of neighborhood in another country figuring it out, but often in refugee camps and difficult situations. And then what's even more intense, particularly in Lebanon right now, and in a minute we're going to invite on a Boy with the Balls regional Middle East director, Anna Currie, who's you guys all know very well. But what's particularly intense for a region like that is because there's crisis around, that crisis can very quickly become crisis in your country as well. And so you're not just dealing with refugee crisis coming to you that you're trying to help, but you're even dealing with your own displacement in your country. And I think as we speak, over 500,000 people from the south of Lebanon have flooded up into Beirut. And it's not a big country. So why would you say Boy with a Ball or a team like us or anybody who is a believer around the world should care about young people who are going through these kind of displacements?
I think for a lot of reasons, I'll give two. But I think young people are young people regardless of, they don't get to choose what happens necessarily in their environment. So then we could reject them because they don't look like something that we were looking for. So like we weren't looking for more people to come here. We're full. But those young people themselves didn't choose to flee. It was chosen for them oftentimes, but then also like most people don't flee the comforts of their own home unless they have to your point. And so then they're the next generation. And so we get to choose, our response chooses a little bit the leaders of the next generation. We can extend compassion and care to teach a next generation compassion and care and hospitality, or we can sow anger and hurt and aggression in our response. I also think there's stories in the Bible where there was persecution and people had to flee borders like Jesus. And so I think it's not something that's new to this time. It's something that's always been around. And each time we're extended the opportunity and how to respond.
Yeah, Abraham was an immigrant because God told him to be. So, all right. Well, today we're going to bring on Anna, and I think it should be a pretty great conversation. Any last thoughts before we jump in?
No, I'm ready to see Anna.
All right.
We are here with Anna Currie, all the way in Beirut, Lebanon.
Beirut, Lebanon. So we always talk, oh, when you come on the show, Anna, that you and Christine used to be roommates, but now you're not even country mates.
We've gone as far opposite now as you can.
You're not even continent mates.
No, I was on
It
her
has nothing to
continent.
do. Yes, you were. We were in Asia together.
She
I
texted
did
me and said,
feel it.
"Welcome to
Yeah,
Asia."
back
But
to
you were still, it's almost like you flew, she was your halfway point almost, and you just kept
yeah.
flying.
No, I didn't even go over
Oh, I know, but I
the
mean,
other
like,
way.
you're on the other half
Asia,
of the.
Yeah.
Asia's big.
Still like I think it was a 6 hour time difference.
I think you're about to say, Anna, that it's not because you don't love Christine.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. It has nothing to do with Christine.
Glad I didn't force you to flee.
No, no, no fleeing.
All right. Well, that leads us to a really good question. We kind of introed this time by just talking about youth in crisis, and that, very often something happens, a conflict in a country where, for some reason, in the middle of making shopping lists and, figuring out the what's happening, meal prep for the next week, and getting ready to go over to a family gathering on a Sunday afternoon, something so significant happens in a country where all of a sudden staying is a worse, horrifying situation than upending your family and having to move them to get very quickly into a whole new world where you don't usually end up in a suburban neighborhood where you're back in school, actually where you're totally interrupted and you end up in refugee camps. And so we're talking about that is one level of being in crisis. And there's so many young people today that are experiencing that. But then we were saying that one of the true realities of being a country where you touch that is that conflict, that world, that tumultuous world can very quickly touch you. And all of a sudden, where you were receiving refugees, just as Lebanon has been for the last few years from both Palestine, but then also from Syria.
Syria.
Now the conflict is within the borders of Lebanon, and you have over 500,000 Lebanese flowing upward into Beirut. So, that was our intro. And I guess all that to say, Anna, first of all, just regardless of all of that, why are you in Beirut right now? Like, what's your mission? Why are you there? What is God's purpose for you being there? And then we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be in the situation you're in, to be following him into that mission.
My mission in Lebanon is to respond to God's call here, to reach young people and to build a team that can reach young people. And that's what I am here doing. And really seeing that actually in the midst of what's happening, and there's a lot of openness and room for, I think, things to build and to grow deeper, even just based on the necessity of what's happening right now.
I can see that your window's open and it looks beautiful outside your window behind you.
Yes. You asked a second question. What was it? I think I answered.
Yeah, you kind of
the
answered
first.
it, but it was basically with that original mission of being over there. And I mean, some of the things that you were focused on are a lot has happened in Lebanon over centuries, really. But in the last few decades, a tremendous amount has happened. And then the bomb blast in Beirut, most recently, the conflict in Syria that has poured just hundreds of thousands of Syrians into millions, really, right?
Yes, almost 2 million.
Almost 2 million individuals to come across the borders into Lebanon. Lebanon in this moment doesn't have a functional, fluid government. Is that right?
No, caretaker government since October of, I believe, 2022. So we're coming up on 2 years without a functional government.
That means you just had a huge disaster happen in your capital. You have a disaster happening next door where people are flooding in, which overwhelms the systems. And then you really don't have anybody at the wheel to kind of figure out things like garbage systems or other tricky pieces that happen. Then that kind of stuff has created conflict where, because the level of inflation is so high and the economy is spinning, and people have been leaving Lebanon even before any of this happened, particularly younger
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
When you have all of that happening for the Lebanese, it can create a sense of like, hey, our very beautiful country is really struggling. And now we have all these people who are here from another country, and we just need to focus on our country. So now you have a bunch of refugees where they're hurting, but it's not necessarily the first priority of some of the hosts to respond. So that was already happening. And then because of what happened in October of last year between Hamas and between Israel, that conflict has now spilled over into a conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. And what that really, really means is that you have actual bombs that are being dropped in a very focused way, but then even ground troops coming into southern Lebanon. So in the middle of all of those situations, you first of all had a tremendous opportunity, Anna, because you have so many young people. Like one of the things you'd said to us a lot is that not many people are even focusing on young people. So that's just millions of young people that their educations are being disrupted, their futures are being disrupted. I mean, just think of it this way. If you're somebody who's really, really a follower of Jesus, if you're not going further in your education, it's very, very hard to read a Bible. You know, it's hard to even go deeper into a lot of things because you just haven't been developed in your ability to reason through or to process through things. So all of that was already stunted, creating opportunity. And then in the middle of it now, now there's the threat where for many people, they would say, what the heck are you doing there? So I guess I would say, would you walk us through, like, when did you get there? What has been some of what you've seen of the openness of the opportunity before the most recent conflict? And then Christine will pick it up there with a more directed question about, okay, so now what are you seeing now in your situation? So just maybe answer the first question of how has it been since you've been there? When did you get there?
Okay. So I first came actually last summer and spent 6 weeks here. And it was kind of the end of a process that had been about a year long, where we as a team and people here in Lebanon and family had all looked together at what the Lord was doing in um, in building a team here in Lebanon. And then as part of that, me coming to be part of the founding of that. And then I was back in the US for a few weeks, kind of gathering things and preparing to come back to Lebanon. And that was right as things happened in October of last year. So we really, at that point, took 2 weeks and really sought the Lord. And again, with the groups of people, the teams, people here, family, and really at the end of the 2 weeks, we're very clear that I was very clear, our team was very clear, people here were very clear that this is what the Lord had been doing. He knew this would happen, and it was the time to come. One of the things God said to me, even as we were in the midst of that, He said, it's different to arrive after a crisis than to walk with people through a crisis. And there's been several moments, even lately, where the Lord's reminded me of that. So I moved here officially last October, right at the end of October, and then have been here basically since, with a few back and forths to the US for Christmas, conference, other things. And then have been back now in Beirut since the conference and getting back basically end of July. So those are things that are happening, I think, up until this point, basically until the last couple of weeks. And a lot of the conflict has been, focused in other areas, basically the south of Lebanon. As you know, it's spilled now up into the capital. But where I am located is in an area that is not being targeted. And it's basically to the northeast of Beirut, and where it's being targeted is south. And so there's some interesting parts also, like, and that you mentioned this, but a lot of Lebanon has been in multiple wars over the last couple of decades. And so there is a way that people here within conflict kind of know how to keep life moving, and basically looking at what can happen, what needs to happen. And so that's happening on a lot of levels. We're seeing, so that's what's been happening leading up to this point. If there's anything specific to
Yeah,
add
I
to
mean,
that.
I get the great gift of talking with you once a week at least. The last little while we've been talking quite a bit more often, but and got to meet with you and Ziad and Nasserine, who are a couple who are walking with you over there and live in the same complex as you. But some of the stories that are coming out are not stories of you sitting and watching the news or of you with a hard hat on. They're really stories of you navigating, building friendships, getting to know people, walking with them in the middle of the journey of life that just there is a little bit different than it might be in Cleveland or Suwanee, Georgia. Cleveland, Georgia, you could do that one, though I was thinking Cleveland, Ohio. So, but it's a little bit different. But the truth is, it's just life and it's people's hearts. And so you found a lot of traction as you've been connecting with people. Is there anything you'd say about that?
Yeah, no, there's a lot to say about that. You're right. Um, we're in an interesting moment because as a team, we're just a baby team. We're beginning. And so as I was, one of the things as we were watching that and just praying, looking at, there's a lot of need. There's a lot of displaced people right now that are up from the south. You mentioned. So I think it's actually around 1.5 million displaced people right now. And a good number of those are here in Beirut. So you see that everywhere. And I was looking at that and we were talking about it and just praying. But one of the things we realized is like right now our team, can't necessarily respond to all of that. And we're not supposed to. That's not necessarily within our call. We can partner with other groups or help that. But the people that God has connected us to and called us to, how do we walk with them right now? And so basically, have anyone that God has connected us with as we've been here have gotten in touch with, talked with, and they in the conversations, in checking on people, there's been a lot of opportunity is the word, but the ability maybe to walk with people and what they're facing right now. And so for many people, they may not be physically in danger, but the emotional and physical atmosphere of what's happening is heavy. And so walking with them in seeing what doors God might even be opening in their hearts, or if they know Him, how to walk with them and knowing Him deeper. And then there are a few situations where there is like physical displacement. And so then an opportunity in that to help fight for people and what they are facing and what they need and, what that looks like. So each situation is a little different, but there are many opportunities right now with people due to the crisis and the situation. And then specifically, I think right now in a moment where a lot of people well, everyone's facing the same thing, but by being here and everyone's one of people's questions, just so you're not leaving. And as I say, no, I'm here with you. It changes something in their hearts. It changes something in the way the conversation even goes. And it feel like it's furthered or opened a lot of doors that may have taken a longer time to do. We're in there. You say sometimes like fellowship is being in the same ship. You're moving. The same wave is rocking the boat. You're feeling it all. You're experiencing it. And then there's been a tremendous amount of peace. Like I think one of the number one things that if I look back at the last few weeks, like I've been very peaceful and really sense the Lord's both call, but grace and then way forward. Like it's easy to see steps and where to help and where to walk with people right now. And my sense as we're praying and talking together is that actually the team will be born out of this. It won't be like delayed because of this. And even a few weeks before this started, I really sensed the Lord saying that these next few weeks and months would be critical for the team. And so that is in the back of my heart and mind and everything that's happening. And then really, I think one of my number one prayers right now is just, Lord, help me have the eyes to see what you're doing and how you're doing things. And it really is a day by day dependence on Him. I think one of the things, if there was any part of me that thought I knew what I was doing or the way forward, like that is out. And it's a totally new situation. But it's one that each day we can see the Lord unfolding more and more and building more and more, drawing people that He's saying. And it is, I mean, like, this may be jumping into Christine's question, but there's so much that could happen right now as far as young people. And you were mentioning this, but young people, I think everyone suffers in crisis, but young people, I think, take an extra hit because of their development. And so one of the things I've thought for a long time, but just watching again here is like in crisis, you lose long-term development because the immediate becomes the important, which means anything that's longer term is put aside or left behind. And then you're talking, the whole world experienced this during COVID. Then you're talking about delays, and then as they come back. And so I can stop there in case Christine's question goes there, but there's more to say probably.
Taking a note for a second question, but
Okay.
yeah, I think my question that I was going to ask, you've touched on it a little bit, but I was going to see if you can go a little deeper, is, the Lord said it's different to come in after a crisis and than it is to walk with people through crisis. What are some of the ways that you're seeing that play out? Like, you're in the middle of a crisis in both the region, you have conflict on both borders, and now across borders, but then you're doing a lot of co-missioning with different organizations as you're kind of partnering with different groups. What are some of the ways you're seeing that the walking with people or young people specifically in crisis be different than it's been coming in after a crisis?
Okay, on a very practical level, like you're experiencing the very physical realities of what it means to be in a conflict zone. So noises and the feeling of being in that, it's very heavy. It's a very heavy situation. A lot of people are dying. It's very heavy. People are afraid. You're not sure necessarily. There's a lot of uncertainty of what will happen next. And so the heaviness and the sadness and the destruction that's happening, and then you're living that together, and you're living the experience of that together. And so I think on a very practical level, you're going through something, walking through something that then you all understand together. It's kind of there. I think if you go on a deeper level, then it's making a lot of people ask questions of, what's happening, and some in great ways, like, what is the Lord doing in the midst of this? And so then, as you mentioned, some of the groups we're partnering with, I think the ability to say like, hey, this is what we see the Lord doing in this. Let's move with him. Let's go. I think then there's a whole other group of people that maybe know the Lord nominally, but this kind of situation pushes them to go deeper than a nominal belief and have to deal with the very real senses of what's happening and fear. And so it's an opportunity to help them know Jesus deeper. And then some of the comfort in any affliction or the peace that the Lord gives, then able to give in that. And then I think there's another group that doesn't know Jesus. And so it's an opportunity to walk with them and love them in the midst of all the situations that's happening, and show a different way than is happening.
That's great. Another question I have, I'm going to give context for it and then I'm going to ask it. But I know a lot of Boy the Ball's work is because of Love Your City, is very known for just being out in neighborhoods and hurting neighborhoods or the hardest neighborhoods. Your work right now is a little different because you're establishing a regional office. So you're not just like walking around some tough neighborhoods. And so then what does a day look like for you as you're because you're kind of looking for leaders. So like what does some of that look like for you?
Okay, so I'll answer that in a few ways. So one, right now, the situation, there is what it was 2 weeks ago, and then there is what it is right now, which is kind of a day-to-day looking. I mean, we're really taking each day as it comes, and we're planning, but holding all plans loose in case things need to change. But one of the things, again, that I've just felt as the Lord is, what he's saying and all this, is that the team is really where the focus is. And so a lot of my focus and time of the last even couple of weeks, like, is, around team and around people that I'm either already discipling or have the potential to walk with, or that could potentially be part of the team in, as it builds and as it grows. There's also, I think, again, I'm taking some lessons from COVID that the Lord taught us. But one was, the mission hasn't changed. How it happens maybe changes slightly, but the mission hasn't changed. And so really engaging that. And so then there's some things that are the same. I mean, like I'm taking Arabic classes, and that's remained largely the same. Every now and then we have to shift to an online, situation. But mostly we've been able to be in person. And then, there's, I think, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts here. One of the things that the visible or has made me realize or think maybe see it differently is that it it's just a tangible reality of what's happening all the time. And so recognizing that spiritual battle it's actually bigger even than what's happening in the visible. And that's something I hear the Lord saying constantly is just don't look just at the visible, look at what I'm doing in the invisible. His kingdom is in the invisible. It's in people's hearts. And so it's happening. So a lot of the focus has been towards that, the development of the team with people. There's still things again are still functioning. So like there's a lot happening around the NGO paperwork. We're close to getting that submitted. Very close. Like hopefully within the next week or two, we'll be able to get that submitted, and that will be then, in process, which will be wonderful, and that would allow us to become a legal organization here in Lebanon, hopefully by mid next year, depending obviously on what happens, and praying for that. There's a lot of still learning. I say like one of the biggest things, I think even in response to crisis, I think there's a lot of learning right now as far as what groups are doing it well and what groups aren't doing it well. I'm learning a ton just as I'm around. Getting to volunteer with one of our partner organizations that is feeding basically anywhere from 400 to 800 people a day. And so learning, some of that side, learning there's another organization that's doing like children and youth ministry and going to the schools and being part of that. So just seeing like the ways people are doing it, learning that, and then pulling in people with me to go there. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I think as somebody who's involved pretty daily with you, it's clear to see three huge things that are happening with you, Anna. One is you're still acculturating, and the fact that you can keep going in language classes while still practicing and getting out into real life. That's great. So you're getting language. You are, like you're saying, you're acculturating when you get in trouble in your new country because you didn't respond the way that they thought you should. That's a good sign. So you're in those situations.
Happening. Yes.
Check. But then you get to the next side of it where it's an interesting acculturation process where in some ways Lebanon's changing. Crisis means the whole country changes. So you're actually there at the point of inception. You're like, you're both learning cultural and just realities of the area, but at the same time, you are going through something. So it's an interesting way to acculturate. On a second level, we've said this to you a few times, but it's like a baptism in water where up until this point, people could say to you, well, what do you know about Lebanon? What do you know about the realities of Beirut? You've not been here, but you're getting like this baptism into being there and being given credit for it and credibility. Yeah, because of this crisis. So that's sort of, I don't know how else that could happen. It's almost like you're getting a fast forwarded reality. But then the third thing is, you said it a minute ago, you're kind of being cooked, like you and that team there and the people that are being formed. This is also like being in a kiln where it's forming and putting in pieces in place that will be really, really battle tested, literally, but really more heat tested. So those things are great. I remember Jackie Pollinger, who you and I like a lot, she used to come to the States and people would share stories of what was happening in the Triad gangs and the walled city in Hong Kong. And people would come up to her afterwards and be like, oh, I'm so sorry that you're having to go through suffering. And she would say, oh, I'm so sorry that you're not. And so that's an interesting question, is that your existence right now kind of is perplexing to particularly a Western culture that's entire life is built from a consumer perspective of like what's beautiful, what's amazing, what will build my brand, what will build my family, what feels good, what is perfectly safe, all that kind of stuff. But what you just said is that the spiritual battle that they can't see means they're really, really not safe and at times asleep in those situations. But no matter what, still they're watching what you're going through and they just can't figure it out. Yet when I was reading through just the letters from Paul to the different churches, and when you're reading through what Jesus himself is saying, it's not necessarily, he's for sure saying, seek first the kingdom, seek first where I'm alive, where I'm telling you to go, and trust me to protect you, and trust me to take care of your life. And that's just what it means to be a believer. So, yeah, we're watching all that. We're watching what you're doing and how it's going for you. And it's easy to be excited for you and kind of exhilarated. But I will say this, and you can add some details to this. You have a really good plan of action, and you have a really good kind of way of knowing what you should do, and that you and Ziad and Nasreen, you've kind of laid out a grid around you of certain geographic space, where in this moment there's peace and safety and clarity within that space. So the moment that that space becomes trespassed or violated, then at that moment you guys are in a different decision-making spot. You've got a bag packed. You've got opportunities, whether it's to fly out or to take a boat. And then you guys, even there, you have an opportunity. You're up on the side of a mountain, but you've got the opportunity to go up over the mountain into a secluded place where there's food. You've been counted in among those numbers. So you're in a situation where you're really making decisions about what's happening with you, and you're in a great spot. But I think this is probably where we'll end for today. But is there anything that you would say to people who are praying for you, who know you, who think you're amazing? You watched their dogs or their cats when you were a teenage girl, and those animals somehow managed to survive that adventure. What would you say to those guys?
No names mentioned.
None.
I would say a few things. I think one, I think praying for the team that's being built, like that is the heart of Boy the Ball. That we're a ministry team called to follow Jesus and to reaching young people here. And um, so that's the number one thing I feel like is happening right now. And I feel like besides the fact that there's a war, there's a lot of spiritual resistance to that happening. And so that would probably be the number one thing to pray for. I think the two next things I would say is like we're in a moment right now where we're not sure how long this will be. You know, it could be prolonged potentially. It could end soon. Praying it ends soon. But there's the response of right now, you know, as this team does form, what's the Lord saying right now and how to respond. Specifically for young people, there's a group of young people. So to your point, there were 700,000 young people not in school before this crisis. And private schools just went back, which is great, but public schools basically haven't even started their year yet. And all the public schools have been turned into shelters for all the displaced people. And so there's some question, like even if the conflict were to end tomorrow, a lot of the areas where the displaced people have come from are destroyed. So they're looking at like kind of temporary solutions of what happens. So there's the like right now of response. But then there's also going to be the next phase as things do end, whenever that is, like what happens, you know, next. So praying for the team, praying we'd have eyes to see how to respond right now, and then eyes to see, you know, what could happen as we move into that next phase.
Great. I'm going to pray a short prayer to finish this off. Jesus, we pray for Anna's protection, pray for her heart, pray for that team, pray for this mission, Lord, that you who began a good work in Anna and then in this team, that you'll be faithful to complete it. Pray that there'll be supernatural breakthroughs that we'll get to report right back on this podcast and beyond. But pray for all of us, Lord, as we support her and care for her. Lord, we help us not to be reduced to being nervous Nellies or people who are without faith and are a burden to this amazing journey. And then finally, Lord, we just pray for this area. We pray that your kingdom would come and your will would be done. And we particularly pray that so many young people would come to know you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, we're back.
We're back. All right. So we had that chance to kind of run through stuff with Anna. So let's shift it just slightly. Why is any of this stuff important to people who are living anywhere else? Like, I just think that's a really interesting question. It's like, I really care about this stuff. I care about young people who are hurting. So I just deeply care. Wherever they're hurting the most, I may care even more. So I really believe young people everywhere are caring. But what would you say, Christine, when you think about everything that's happening over there? People obviously care very much about Anna, who know Anna, but why in the world would you care about the young people in these situations if you're not us or me?
Yeah, I think I said a little bit, but it's important. I think for a lot of reasons. Like I think if you're listening to this podcast, you're a believer of some sorts, or you've stumbled upon a weird link on Instagram. But most people, from what I can tell in our metrics, are people who would call themselves believers, whether they're in the marketplace or in the church. So then, like, or you're a young person yourself who likes what we're saying because it's about your generation. But on one level, a lot of these young people, specifically in Lebanon, there's a lot of believers in Lebanon. So it's like you're talking about the persecuted church in a lot of ways. I think also it is how we react today to what's happening to internally displaced people or refugees dictates the kind of leaders we have in 5, 10, 20 years. One, because young people in the West see how we respond, and so then they will then continue that kind of response. But then at that time, oftentimes after 20 years, we realize all the times we got it wrong, but then they've now learned the way to do it wrong. That's why we have history books that show all the ways that history has gone poorly. And then I think for the young people themselves who find themselves in these really hard situations, they either learn that there's a whole group of people that have been praying, fighting for them to make it, or they learn there was this whole group of people who did nothing about it and just didn't care because it didn't fit it within their context, or it wasn't right at their front door, or it's on the other side of the world, so why should I care? And so either way, that changes and forms their person and how they respond to the rest of the world.
Yes, it's absolutely right. Yeah. So I think about it this way, is that maybe you shouldn't care about this. That's actually the first thing to say to you. If you're listening to this and you have any question, maybe the first thing to say to you is you shouldn't care about this because your own heart is so on fire. You're so hurting. You may be somebody who is offended that Christine just said you're believers, you know Jesus, because you don't know Jesus and you don't really care about that kind of stuff. But what I would say to you in that situation, or even if you are the kind of person who hangs out in churches, for you, it could be that your own heart is so on fire. Your own situation of displacement and damage and disorder, it's so great. What's happening in your heart is so intense that you're like a person on fire. You should never ask a person on fire or a person who's drowning for a quarter because they're busy, they're on fire, they're hurting so badly. And so you might be in a situation where it's a place we call complacency. And a few seasons ago, we talked about this, but it's a place in consumption even where you're hurting so bad that you need stuff. You need to consume. You're pouring stuff into you to try to get to some place of peace or meaning or value or importance or dignity. And so if that's you, yes, do not get caught up in what's happening across the world. That's silly. That's like, and there are people who do that. They don't deal with the fire in their own life. And so they throw themselves into situations around the world almost as a way of avoidance. It's a way to get out of the real issue of what's happening in your heart. So if that's you, that's interesting. It does bring up an interesting issue of you may not think that's you, but you may have absolutely no compassion for any other situation other than your own family or your career, maybe your small church or your big church. And I would say to you, you might be in that situation I just described, and you've just effectively found things that have satiated you. But the fact that compassion doesn't rise out of you for people who haven't found help, that should be an indicator. Because here's what we know. What's really extraordinary about Jesus, and I don't know that I can speak for every single church you've ever walked into or every experience you've ever had with somebody who claims to be a believer in Jesus. It's really true of Jesus himself. And I challenge you to go back to the Gospels, is that he's someone who comes seeking to help. He's coming in to restore, to save, to help you. And you could say, save, what are you talking about? I don't need to be saved. But you know you do. You know you're in situations where whether it's your marriage is breaking or you're struggling with your children or you can't even overcome your own heart or think straight, you need someone to reach out a hand to you and lift you up. That's exactly what Jesus does. And so for those of us who are believers, we are the community of the forgiven. We're the ones that when Jesus walked in, he looked right past the fact that we've rejected him and said he's not important to us. He forgave us and he picked us up and he took care of us, just as if he saved us, he rescued us, he transformed us, just as if we had chosen him full-heartedly. And that's amazing. It's called prevenient grace. He showed us grace even when we hadn't chosen it yet. And when that really happens in your heart, when you know that's really happened in your heart, where you're so overcome by gratitude, you're so experiencing what it's like to be with him. Because when he touches somebody, when he walks into the room, it changes everything. It really does. It changes everything. It's not even just like, oh, wow, now I'm a part of a church. I mean, part of a church is just a place where you can grow in all these things. But it's like, man, I know him. Like, I was a person who didn't know him, and I was in trouble because I didn't know him, because I was getting beaten up and ripped apart by life. But now he's helping me. He's loving me. He's protecting me. He's changing things for me. And now that level of healing and help has gotten to the point where I don't feel at risk, to the point where I only can consume things for myself, or I only can look for ways to save myself. But actually, I feel safe in it. And what about the other guys? What about the other people back in that burning building? Or what are the other people who are drowning? And so, first of all, maybe you shouldn't be focused on around the world. Maybe you should focus just on your own heart. And if you find yourself with no compassion, and actually maybe even mad that people care about anything but you, then you may be, we used to say, swimming in like you may be trapped in self to such an extent that you're in trouble. And it could be that you're trapped in a difficult marriage or you're trapped in situations, but the truth is you need help and you can get it. Now, first of all, you can cry out to Jesus, but second of all, man, email Christine or call her. Now, about 1:30 at night is like a particularly amazing moment. She's just so lucid. She's so clear. No. The second thing I would say to you, and then Christine, I'll leave it to you to kind of close this, but second thing I'd say to you is beyond, maybe you shouldn't care about that because you need to focus on your own heart. You're in trouble. You're disordered. You're displaced. Second piece is maybe now you have started to show compassion, but you haven't started. We talk about concentric circles like ripples in a pond, when you throw a rock. Maybe the first thing you've got to do is turn and love the people around you well. Like being a part of a church is so great because now your experience with Jesus is not just about you. It's about you and others. And so you're going with people, but for sure your family. Like you don't want to be focused on people over on the other side of the world when your kids are getting the raw, into the stick. But then even your neighbors and the people in your neighborhood, your coworkers, man, go for it. When you can start to see their story and can start to have compassion on them, you're really going to be getting somewhere. And you can tell you're really getting to loving your neighbors, which is just loving your proximates. Our friend Matt Brennan with Subsplit. Hi, Matt. He says, loving your adjacents. Yeah, well, you can tell you're getting to a place there when all of a sudden you're like, well, what about the people who are hurting in my city? And we call that one Love Your City. And of course, we have a whole conference called Love Your City. It's coming in May, very end of May, beginning of June. You should come to it. But yeah, that's a really great place to get involved there. And what's cool is you're learning how to impact people who have been displaced or who are hurting or who are just spending for whatever reason in your city. And then what happens when you start to book travel or book your heart on focusing on other places? Now you are a true change maker where your focus is great. Still, it does matter when the least and the most hurting and the people who are being punched in the gut, we've got to care. Just got to care, right?
Yeah, I think you stole my punchline of the city conference.
Still it.
But the dates for the conference are, well, this year's conference is, the theme is purpose, and so that actually is a little bit of what we're talking about. Is where do we fit in all of this? What are we called to, and how do we engage these really big conversations and our lives wholeheartedly in a way that is leading towards the fulfillment of God's purpose for our lives.
Yeah.
But it's a big conversation, and it starts now, and how we have it will continue. It does start with you personally, and you and the Lord, and you and your family, and then it is your neighbors, and then your city, and then
The world.
and then the world. Like, we can't forget. We can skip steps where it's like we hijack and bypass where we currently are to try to solve some problem to avoid where we currently are. But then there are people who you've done a pretty good job where you are, and then you stay there, and that's where it's not totally okay, because we are called to love and to serve. And so if you've nailed it where you are, then there's probably greater places he's called you to as well. The Love Your City Conference, May 29th, 30th, and 31st. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next episode.
All right. See you guys soon.